SDGs back on track are our shared responsibility. The General Assembly can and play a part. Going forward, the gaps in political will and resource commitment remain a common fault line in our resolve to progress the SDGs. This must change. We need to ensure that countries, in particular the LDCs, LLDCs, and the SIDS, have access to adequate resources and capacity, support in their efforts to recover from the pandemic and achieve the SDG targets. Like everything else on policy, there is no one-size-fits-all. For this very reason, the SDG movement and platforms such as the ECOSOC's High-Level Political Forum offer an opportunity to reflect on where we are, where we could be, and what is holding us back, and the way forward. I encourage all to share success, best practices, lessons learned, challenges, and failures alike to achieve the SDGs. Only together, through effective collaboration and meaningful cooperation, we will learn to find the best way to forward. Let the setback that the world has seen strengthen our resolve and reinforce our determination to recover from the pandemic, to build sustainably and achieve the SDGs. Together, it is possible, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those encouraging words. We can't measure progress without the right metrics. So before we go to studio by Ms. Claire Casey, the Global Head of Policy and Insights at Economist Impact.
World leaders came together in 2015 to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals. We all knew the challenge ahead of us. And we've made progress, but it has been hard-won, uneven, and fragile. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us just how fragile. Today, humanity faces a stark and urgent choice. Do we allow pressures to grow, or do we break through to a greener, safer, and more equitable future? At Economist Impact, we're dedicated to driving positive change by using data and evidence to better understand the biggest issues and evaluate the best solutions. And we've been closely tracking action on the SDGs. Today, as we explore progress against the Sustainable Development Goals, let's remember, we know what we have to do, and we have the tools. The question is, do we have the will to act and keep the promise of Agenda 2030? Let's start with Goal 1, eliminating extreme poverty by 2030. In just 18 months, the COVID-19 pandemic erased 5 years' worth of progress, pushing more than 97 million people back into extreme poverty. If we don't take action now to right our course, we risk arriving at 2030 with more than 600 million people living in extreme poverty. We also know we can't move forward without women and girls. Since 2015, we've made progress on gender equality, but not nearly enough. Maternal mortality continues to fall, but we need to move more than 4 times faster if we're to achieve our target of 70 deaths per 100,000 live births by 2030. In politics, women now hold 26% of seats in national parliaments. But at the current rate of improvement, it will take no fewer than 40 years to achieve gender parity. And when we look at the workforce, women are still grossly underrepresented, with less than half of women participating compared to more than 70% of men. This hasn't budged since 2015. COVID has only exacerbated these disparities. Female-dominated industries were disproportionately affected across both formal and informal sectors. The number of women employed declined by 54 million in 2020. As COVID impoverishes communities, closes schools, and reduces access to reproductive health care, it's estimated that 10 million more girls than previously projected are at a risk of becoming child brides through 2030. Violence has also risen. Before the pandemic, we knew that 1 in 3 women would experience violence at least once in her lifetime. During the pandemic, some countries reported a devastating 5-fold increase in calls to helplines. When we talk about gender equality, we tend to address it through this humanitarian lens. But equality doesn't just benefit individuals. It benefits whole societies and economies. Achieving gender equality could unlock $12 trillion. The opposite is also true. Nations that fail women fail. One powerful tool to ensure equality of opportunity across communities and around the world is connectivity. And this is an area where we've made tremendous progress. 4 billion people around the world are connected to the internet, 1 billion of whom came online since 2015. But COVID has acted sort of like a time machine, hurtling us all forward into a digital future in which we access our jobs, our education, healthcare, financial services, even our friends and family, all online. So for those 3 billion people still unconnected, the costs have never been higher. 1/3 of children globally were unable to access remote learning during COVID lockdowns, and we saw the immediate impact. 101 million children fell below minimum reading proficiency levels in 2020. We also know the returns we get from investments in connectivity. They're massive. Connecting schools to the internet boosts GDP by up to 20% in least connected countries. It also shows how intertwined the SDGs are. An increase in connectivity can contribute to increases in educational outcomes, prosperity, and gender equality. But a prerequisite to meaningful connectivity is access to reliable, affordable electricity. And after years of good progress, we've lost ground here as well. In 2020, we saw the number without electricity in Africa increase for the first time in 6 years. Without major changes today, we could reach 2030 with 660 million people living without access to power. Equity must be addressed within the context of the ongoing worsening crisis is climate change. Only by unleashing the power of clean energy will we be able to end energy poverty while protecting our planet. After a brief pause in 2020 when we all stayed home, emissions are back on the rise. Climate change is not a future challenge. We're already feeling its impact. The economic costs from extreme weather are 1.3 trillion over the last 10 years. That's a 40% increase from the previous decade. And if we continue on this course, we will create an unlivable planet with the greatest suffering borne by those least responsible. In 2015, the world came together in Paris to commit to limit global warming, and we've made important progress since then. The cost of renewables continues to decline. Clean power is now often the most affordable option, and low-carbon fuels have surpassed coal as the largest source of electricity generation. But as we look towards COP26 in Glasgow this November, it must be with clear eyes. Our policies are grossly insufficient to meet the present challenge. Our research tells us that more governments and businesses are turning their attention to this issue than ever before, but it's not enough. We must act now to prevent the worst. COVID was a wake-up call and a model for what's possible. It showed us what happens when an abstract threat becomes very real. In 2020 alone, governments mobilized and deployed 14 trillion in pandemic support. Through unprecedented public and private collaboration, we developed and deployed safe and effective vaccines faster than anyone imagined. We did it because we had to. A sustainable, inclusive future demands we act with the same urgency. Governments, businesses, civil society working together. To achieve the promise of Agenda 2030, we will need partnerships and collective action, technology and innovation, effective institutions and delivery mechanisms, better data to set baselines and track progress, and a relentless focus on our responsibility to future being left behind. We are 1 year in Decade of Action. It is time to act.
So is going to require action from all actors and all people, especially youth. which is why we're therefore pleased, and as a Korean American, distinctly honored, to be joined by His Excellency, Mr. Moon Jae-in, the President of the Republic of Korea, to deliver and to introduce a very special guest. Welcome, Mr. President.
President Abdullah Saeed, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, distinguished delegates, I am extremely delighted to join you at SDG Moment 2020, and I am grateful for inviting me to this special. A research institute of the United Nations recently released a report that found that all disasters in the world are interconnected. For instance, the heat wave in the Arctic and cold wave in Texas, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic and Cyclone Amphan that hit Bangladesh, are closely connected with one another through the links of carbon emissions and environmental destruction. If the problems are interconnected, then so be the solutions. When humanity transcends national boundaries to work together, that in and of itself would be first step towards surmounting a crisis. Right in this hall 6 years ago, the UNGA adopted Sustainable Development Goals, and 2 years ago, it proclaimed towards an inclusive future were held back by COVID-19. That brought home the desperate need. Our commitment to action grew stronger. We must move ourselves beyond simply overcoming the crisis to build back better and stronger. If actions that we take together are interconnected, we will deliver without a doubt. First, our commitment to inclusion and mutual prosperity must be immediately put into action now. That action can begin with an equitable access and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines by the international community. At G7, the Republic of Korea made a $200 million pledge to COVAX AMC. As one of the global vaccine hubs, we're committed to making continued endeavors to expand vaccine supply and support. Taking a step further, we stand ready to actively contribute to strengthening international health cooperation at WHO, among others. Second, we must collaborate beyond our borders in responding to the climate crisis. Our planet is getting hotter faster than anticipated, with extreme weather events occurring one after another in every part of the world. Carbon neutrality is a goal that developed and developing countries alike must move towards in tandem. To this end, leading countries in climate action must partner with developing countries